Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESGCV. My name is LaQuantia Goodman, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hour session is being recorded for public record. Office hours recordings are on the HCD ESG webpage under Technical Assistance and Training. A copy of the slide deck and recording will also be emailed to you by your grant administrator or annual representative. Next slide, please. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered in the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESGCV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the question and answer session. Next slide, please. Today's office hour session agenda includes the following: ESG and ESGCV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESGCV question and answer, and today's spotlight session, youth homelessness. Next slide. We don't have any specific ESG updates today, but please note this slide, which is slide 4, and the next upcoming slide. Next slide, please, Taylor. And use this information as needed to contact your ESG representative when needed. Now I have just a few ESGCV updates and reminders. Expenditure milestone deadline is January 31st, 2023. All ESGCV grantees must have expended at least 75% of their total award. Financial reports with actuals must be submitted no later than January 31st, 2023. No accruals. Next slide. Reminders for performance milestones. All program funds for projects, which include street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, shall all be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. All final requests for funds, RFFs, shall be submitted to the department no later than November 15th, 2023. And you all received emails stating that we were asking for success stories. HCD is collecting success stories for the ESG CV grant. If you have a success story from one of your providers or programs that you would like to share, please email it to your grant administrator. Remember to redact any PII in your submission. Next slide. Next, we have a non-HCD training opportunity for you all. And that training is on preventing fatal overdoses in homeless service programs. This will be a 90-minute webinar from the California Department of Public Health that will improve participants' understanding of substance use and the fatal overdose crisis among people experiencing homelessness. It will introduce principles and techniques for overdose prevention and reversal. It will explain legal protections around overdose reversal in California. It will share firsthand stories for providers in the field and allow time for questions and answers. It will discuss caring for staff and clients after an overdose. And lastly, it will empower the webinar participants with information, resources, and supplies to prevent a fatal overdose in their programs and communities. And once you receive the slide deck, you'll be able to click right there on the link so that you can register for that training. Next slide. HCD office hours updates. In the next few weeks, you will see the next these next 4 office hour topics or spotlights: written standards and policies and procedures review expectations on November 2nd. On November 9th, we'll have ESG CV grant sunset. November 16th, ESG and ESG CV contract amendment process. And on December 12th, ESG outcomes. And please remember to use the links below to access the previous office hours and the YouTube channel for other ESG and CV office hours. Next slide. Upcoming trainings in October and November. We only have a week or so left in October, but we do have one more October training: Calling In and Calling Out Racial Equity Series. And in November, on November 1st, the Coordinated Entry System session and the ESG and ESG CV Administration Component Deep Dive. Next slide. And then lastly, November 3rd, Case Management Best Practices, Housing Stabilization and Community Workshop. Whenever you receive the slide deck, please be sure to go in and register for these trainings so you can stay updated. Next slide, please. This slide contains our COVID response resources. Please use them as needed to stay abreast of everything that's going on continually with COVID. Next slide. And then you'll use this slide for your monkeypox resources. And lastly, our ESG resource links. And next slide. Do we have any questions right now? I know we don't have any in the chat, but is there anyone that may have some that they haven't asked in the chat? If not, of course, remember you can still ask questions throughout this presentation by dropping your questions into the chat. Next slide, please. Feel free to contact us, contact your annual ESG representative personally, or using the main inbox at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov, or reach out to your ESG CV grant administrator. Next slide. And now we will turn it over to Ziggy and Kyra for our spotlight session on youth homelessness.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the warm introduction. Hi, my name is Ziggy Keys. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a TA provider at ICF, and today me and my colleague are going to talk to you about youth homelessness and what that means. Kira, come say hi.
I will. Hi, everyone. I'm Kira. I use she, her pronouns, and also on the ICF team, working quite a bit in the world of youth homelessness. And so really excited to talk with you all about this today. And thank you for inviting us. Ziggy, you want to kick us off?
Sure, no problem. We're going to go right into the next slide. As a disclaimer, my level of attention span while I'm on camera is questionable. So with that energy, I'm probably going to go on and off camera depending on how much I have to read. Just because squinting at the screen is unpleasant for all involved. That being said, so we're going to talk about the definition of youth. So for this context, youth experiencing homelessness can mean unaccompanied minors between the ages of 12 to 17 who are living apart from their parents' legal guardians, or young adults from 18 to 24 who are economically and or emotionally detached from their families and are experiencing homelessness or unstable, inadequate living situations. So this can mean couch surfing, staying in shelters, staying in places not meant for human habitation, or just kind of far enough estranged where their relationship with their families, their parents, their guardians is relatively non-existent. They're effectively taking care of themselves or being dependent on others to be taken care of. youth homelessness is one of those slippery slope definitions, whereas the way that youth define homelessness for themselves generally doesn't match up with like the HUD definition of youth homelessness, and that is perfectly okay. But bearing that in mind at the same time, this definition in itself comes from California Coalition for Youth, and it's a pretty good general overview that's going to fit along well enough with HUD definition of homelessness. Kara, do you want to add anything? If not, we're going to slide to the right. Dope. Okay, so looking at this any deeper, before we look at some data, we're going to talk about some more things. Determining accurate numbers of youth who experience homelessness is pretty hard, and point in time counts tend to be inaccurate. There's a solid couple of reasons for this. So, A, youth are unlikely to trust our systems and can try to avoid detection. B, youth are highly mobile. C, most systems are not equipped to account youth who are like staying in inconsistent places or finding places to stay, like couch surfing. And the processes driven by point in time counts are not youth centered. So we try to use our best available data to get these numbers. But like what effectively happens when using the best available data is that using the best data doesn't mean that you're getting the best number. It means that you're doing the best with what you got. A lot of these things aren't things that you can avoid or like dodge by yourself. Got it. A lot of these things aren't things you can like account for by yourself. Like the high mobility of youth, part of that is because like, example, you have friends, you have other family, you can go other places. And the ability to like trust systems. In order to trust the system, you have to know that system is there to trust in the first place. It takes a lot for you to know that systems exist in order to get the help and services that they need. So like similar to most people, you're gonna go with what you know before you go somewhere else. And that's human, that's being resourceful. That's just how this tends to work. So typically the people that are counted in point in time counts, looking at these data in their systems, either they A, know that things are there, or B, they feel that they don't have options, and that's how we got counted. That's effectively what happens. Just as a little bit of background content, I was a formerly homeless youth, so I am a person with lived experience who is now like a TA provider telling you all the things. Not all the things, but the things I know. So like effectively, youth like to dodge systems because systems, especially like unaccompanied minors, because getting help from a system often sounds like getting reported to child welfare. And that's something that most youth, whether or not they have the best relationship with their adults, is something that they're trying to avoid, either A, for the sake of themselves, or B, for the sake of their siblings. Just because a relationship with one person isn't the best doesn't mean it needs to be a universal problem. That's a lot of the energy that youth tend to take. Kara, I'm going to pass it to you or look at you if you want to add stuff.
No, that's excellent. I think this is just one little thing is like this is an important point before we dive into some data that we do know, and like keep this in mind. We know that data is imperfect. We use, as it says here, best available data because there are limitations. And part of the data that we want to lean into always is just talking to young folks, talking to your community, and learning from the folks in your community about their experiences, because simply relying on these quantifiable data sources are not sufficient on their own.
Agreed. Also, just to explain my silly gift, like, yeah, you're hiding Homer Simpson, but also like, because you can't find youth, can't find Homer either. He blends into your nice white background, same vibes. So like the same way he can hide is the same way everyone in said situation try to hide, both for self-protection, but also in the mind, like self-preservation. And now we're gonna go to the next slide. Also, if I'm talking too fast, yell at me in the chat because I do that. It's a New York thing, I think. Oh, wrong button. Maybe. All right. So, on a single night in January 2020, 34,210 youth were reported to be experiencing homelessness in the United States. 2,172 youth, 36% of those were reported in the state of California. And these are the number of unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness per 1,000 based on color. My reading map energy is questionable, so I'm gonna like defer to my nice set of notes over here. So this data comes from the 2020 annual homeless assessment report. So due to COVID response rate counts have been pretty inconsistent across these annual years for obvious reasons. COVID is something that change things and also shape the way we tend to do things because we had to rapidly adjust, and a lot of systems were not set up for that level of rapid adjustment. The 2021 and 2022 homeless assessment reports only provided shelter numbers, and presenting that data was artificial. Since we know California, typically the largest portions of youth are counted in the PIT are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So the PIT count specifically concentrates on unsheltered homelessness.
Mhm.
In order to be assessed within the PIT count, yeah, when I'm not like trying to squint, I'll be on camera. In order to be assessed within the PIT count, if you haven't been part of a PIT count, I'm gonna back up. The PIT count is effectively you pick the coldest night of the year to go out into your community, somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and you count every single person you can find and ask them if there's somebody that experienced homelessness, ask them if they have somewhere to sleep tonight. Some of them say yes, some of them say no. And if they say no, you are supposed to be able to A, connect them immediately to shelter, B, or connect them directly to services. You don't have to, they don't have to accept it. It's not something that has to be done. But the goal is to count every single person you see, because you don't know unless you ask. And the energy behind this is that, and this is just what I think, if you're outside on the coldest night of the year, you probably don't have anywhere else to be. That's also why it's super late at night.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm gonna get more into count energy later. So Kara, I'm gonna pass to you if you want to say stuff.
I would just say, again, this is imperfect data, but you can just see visually from this map, like those darker colors along the West Coast, like the prevalence of youth homelessness is higher along the West Coast. And I think actually the next slide gets to that a little bit more as well, what Ziggy was saying around, thank you, around the rates of unsheltered homelessness. So this is from a national report on homelessness, and again from data from the AHAR, but you can see that the states that have the highest rates of youth experiencing unsheltered homelessness as opposed to sheltered homelessness are much higher in generally warmer climates, and then where there are the lowest rates of unsheltered homelessness, again, as opposed to sheltered homelessness, tend to be colder climates. So there is trends that we can see from even imperfect data. There are important trends to be paying attention to.
100%, you got that perfect. Yeah, these are just comparing different states. So like all of the places with the highest rate, California is warm year round, Hawaii is warm year round, Arkansas is warm in winter, Oregon has a low temperature of generally 32. Arizona, my best friend lives in Arizona. She's sweating even in December.
Mhm.
We might get to hoodie weather. But compared to Alaska, Nebraska, Maine, DC, which also has the temperatures of here, and North Dakota, like effect again, the pick count is the same night of the year. It's supposed to be the coldest night of winter. That only works if your climate experiences true winter. At the same time, and this is just a thing specific to California that PIT, point in time. I appreciate you. I talk fast, sorry. So the point in time count. So yeah. So the point in time that they pick is supposed to be the coldest night of the year for these reasons. That only works if you experience true winter.
Mhm.
Example, part of the reason why it is okay in the places with the highest rates to be unsheltered is because you're not trying to avoid the snow. You're not trying to avoid the cold and wet. It is more socially acceptable to take a nap on a beach in California than it is to be standing outside in the snowstorm that is happening in DC. You're not hiding under bridges, you're hiding in plain sight. There's more freedom to hide in plain sight in warm weather. You're not questioning everybody walking around in warmer climates because everyone's outside. You don't look out of place. Whereas in Alaska, in negative degree weathers, you quite quickly
Mhm.
look very out of place. And those are things that happen. So like, going back to the hypermobility of youth, young people, they can couch surf. They'll resource out their families, their friends' houses before they find drop-in centers, find access to things that they need, because before you need it, you're not there. And being in sheltered and warmer climates is something that's a little bit easier to pull off, depending on where you live. And that is a very true thing. That also makes these numbers very skewed. You can't count people you can't see. You're not going to see everybody in these places because when you experience true winter, when it's -15, you find somewhere warm to be inside. You're not going to be outside unless you can find nowhere. I can pass it back, but we can slide along. Did I hit everything? All right. What we know about California. So according to the California Homeless Youth Project, California CFC on average has enough beds to house only 1 of the 7 youth experiencing homelessness. Given different counting methods and definitions, the number of youth experiencing homelessness ranges from 29,532 to 274,460. I'm not good at reading numbers either. That many youth access services in 2020. Sorry. Yeah. Kira, I'm gonna give you this slide.
Well, and like the exact numbers aren't as important as like that difference, like because you mentioned this when we were talking about the definition of homelessness, right? Like there are many ways that homelessness can be defined, and depending on the definition being utilized, the numbers of youth facing homelessness can sound dramatically different. So 29,000 to 274,000 is a very big difference, but those are using different definitions. And so I think the takeaway of this and the takeaway of our kind of review of the data is to really dig deep to understand the experience of homelessness in your community, regardless of definition. Understand more about the specific circumstances of young folks in your community and how homelessness is showing up in your local community, and being able to, respond. And we'll talk about some of the solutions and responses, but be able to respond in ways that are relevant to the needs of your specific community.
I appreciate you. With that, we're going to go right to the next slide. All right. So now we're going to talk about some of the causes of youth homelessness. So some of those can be systematic issues. That's lack of affordable housing, which is happening everywhere. Discrimination based on race, sexual orientation, gender, or other status. This can happen through landlords, housing authorities, anybody who has the power to tell you no. These are things that can happen within those places. And improper discharges from foster care, juvenile justice, and mental health facilities. With a footnote that improper discharges does not always mean that you had the opportunity to be discharged. Sometimes a young person leaves their foster care placement. Sometimes a youth becomes pregnant, and now, unless they're given another option, effectively is forced to become an adult in a system that because they didn't get the chance to be discharged correctly. This can also stem from family issues. So if you're experiencing physical or sexual abuse, parental neglect, strained relationship, all the abuse style things can happen within a family dynamic, or an intimate partner dynamic too, or family tolerance based on sexual orientation or gender identity. That's also a really big one because the footnote for family issues is in a lot of these situations, youth aren't always kicked out. With sexual orientation and gender, they can be, but also discomfort causes people to leave. Nobody wants to be somewhere where they feel unwanted, unloved, unwelcome. Nobody wants to be pulling teeth and fighting over things that are just how you exist. So sometimes passive aggressive energy or overtly aggressive energy can just cause you to leave situations to avoid static, to avoid problems. So like to be a homeless youth doesn't always mean that you were kicked out. It can mean that. It does mean that in a lot of cases, but sometimes it means, I think it's better if I go. It makes it easier. And that's just giving a little bit of background content. And economic issues. So sometimes families suffer financial crises that lead to separation from the family. A youth choosing or being asked to leave the family as a response to overcrowding. So the easiest example I can think of this is intergenerational homelessness is a thing. If a young person is a part of a family that is experiencing homelessness and is in family shelter, that can turn into intergenerational homelessness. If they think they can exit the system quicker by becoming a youth by themselves, that can happen. Or in very specific situations, if a family goes into a victim of domestic violence program, for example, sometimes those programs are curtailed toward women and children. Once your male child turns like 14, they now have to enter a male system by themselves. That can also lead to like divisions within family, separations from family, or like divisions within systems, because now this male child has to enter a different system separately because they have turned a different age. Instead of being kept together, they're split apart because of the way systems tend to function in certain places. So these are all a handful of causes on youth homelessness. And there's more to it than this, but this is just like a general overview of situations that can cause youth homelessness or like attribute to it. Kira?
Thanks, Ziggy. If you want to go to the next slide, got a little more data to throw at you, but really important data about who among youth are at the greatest risk of homelessness. So this is data from the Voices of Youth count conducted by Chapin Hall, the University of Chicago. They actually have a wealth of resources on their website that dig further into this data and where it comes from. But their work really stems from what we were talking about around the imperfections of our existing data collection efforts, and knowing that we need to dig deeper, we need to talk to young folks. And so the Voices of Youth count was an effort to really engage with folks who are experiencing homelessness, are at risk of homelessness, to really better understand their circumstances. And what we find is that the disparities that we know exist in the homeless system overall, that people of color are far more likely to experience homelessness than their white counterparts, and that those who identify as LGBTQ are more likely to experience homelessness. Those disparities are almost wholly exacerbated and more significant when we look just at youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. So some of these key highlights and findings from their work show that youth that have less than a high school diploma or GED had a 346% higher risk of homelessness. That LGBTQ youth are more than twice as likely to experience homelessness. That youth reporting annual household income of less than 24,000 have 162% higher risk. Hispanic and non-white youth, a 33% higher risk. Black or African American youth, 83% higher risk, and parenting youth are at a significant risk as opposed to unaccompanied youth without children in the household. And when we combine these factors as well, it's even more stark and significant. So nearly 1 in 4 young Black men between the ages of 18 and 25 who identify as LGBTQ, so young Black men who also identify as LGBTQ, 1 in 4 reported experiencing homelessness within a 1-year period. So these risks are really important to take into account, again, in how you are working in your community to respond to youth homelessness. Having a really explicit approach to target services and to respond in a way that's relevant to the needs of these young folks and the unique experiences that they are having. Ziggy, anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope, sounds super solid.
Okay. If you want to go to the next slide, a little bit more about what we see in the subpopulations of young folks and what we see in terms of the impacts of homelessness. So this really, why do we focus on youth as a specific subpopulation? Ziggy walked through a lot of the unique circumstances that apply to young folks. But most importantly, homelessness is a health condition, and the longer that someone experiences homelessness, experiences the trauma that comes along with homelessness and the many circumstances they may face along the way, the greater the effect on their overall well-being. And this can take a lot of forms and take a lot of shapes. This particular graphic is again from data from the Voices of Youth count. And this is just looking within the population of young folks that have experienced homelessness, but looking at the difference between those who identify as LGBTQ and those who don't. Across the board, these risks are prevalent for young folks experiencing homelessness. So this increased risk for needing to exchange sex for basic needs, forced to have sex, physically harmed by others. Risk of death is greater for those experiencing homelessness. And we know that across the board. That is true for young folks. And we see that these risks and potential harms are far greater if a young person is also identifying as LGBTQ. And we want to go to the next slide. Just a little bit more on the impacts of a young person experiencing homelessness. If you can just go to the next slide.
Sorry, Kyra, if you can hold on just a second.
No problem. I can start to talk through it. I just want to make sure.
If you don't mind, we'll check it.
Just a little bit more about homelessness as a health condition. So youth experiencing homelessness have a higher incidence of mental health disorders, mental health needs than their house peers. And homelessness contributes to educational challenges. We know that students who identify as experiencing homelessness have lower outcomes in education, but that is true. Students who identify as living in doubled up situations have similar academic outcomes as those who are in shelter or those who are living in hotels or motels or even living unsheltered. So those academic outcomes are really significantly impacted with any form of homelessness or risk of homelessness and any precariously housed situation that young folks are facing. And
Can I add stuff?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so these two slides I hold near and dear to my heart only because like I deeply believe this homelessness is a health condition. There's nothing on either of these slides that like can't be quantified as something that will affect you as you grow up in age. There's nothing there's no level of trauma that is socially acceptable trauma to subject a youth, young adult, or a child to. So like these as like a whole, the reason why this is important, the reason why focusing on youth specifically is so important is that this now affects who this young person, who this young adult has the self-reliance and tools to be who they should become, to be who they have the access to become. So youth experiencing homelessness have higher incidences of mental health disorders than their house peers, more disruptive behaviors, more social phobias, more depression, but also like they have less access to the services, the educational like access. They're more absent from school. They aren't unable to get like special education evaluations done. So like their scores in school can suffer, but also their presence at doctor's appointments can suffer. Their consistency within healthcare can suffer. So the people that would identify these trends within the youth or young adult, they're not in one space long enough to build these connections, to build these relationships. Homelessness to me is a health condition. Focusing on youth is important because it means that you're robbing this young person of the tools, ability, and stability needed to become a fully formed adult. When you're experiencing these things so young, when you're experiencing these challenges as you're developing, you no longer get to develop the way that you should, the way you would if these weren't your experiences. And I'm gonna give it back.
Thank you for that, Ziggy. And I hear you talking about connection and relationships, and that's also something to like pay very special attention to. These impacts that we're talking about here, even just the educational challenges, right? Like being able to go to school regularly. If you have that, if that is not something that you're easily able to do, you are losing that opportunity to have those stable, positive connections with older adult partners that may be supportive in your life in different ways. So the impacts of homelessness and housing instability can also perpetuate isolation and disconnection, the things that make it much more difficult to have that stable, thriving environment. One other thing just about the why focus on youth as a subpopulation. This is data that I have from where I live. I live in Seattle, Washington. So along that West Coast that we looked at earlier, but not quite California. And there was a data point that we found because we were part of the Voices of Youth Count. We also did some other qualitative data collection efforts, really interviewing the young folks in our community, as well as the overall population of people experiencing homelessness. And what we found was that 46% of everybody in our community that responded to our survey who have experienced homelessness first under the age of 25. So the young folks who experience homelessness are far more likely to experience homelessness again in their lifetime. And so this is, again, why it's so important to focus on youth as a subpopulation and build those connections, permanent connections in the community for young folks. All right, I think we can move to the next slide. And here we just want to highlight that not addressing youth homelessness means that we're not addressing gaps within multiple systems. So we all know that homelessness is not the cause of the homeless response system itself. We're responding to a series of failures to build connection, to have the safety net that our communities need. So the coordination with multiple systems in the community is vital to a truly responsive system and supportive system for young folks, whether it be schools, juvenile justice, child welfare, health services, shelter rules and structures, how our housing homeless response systems are built and structured to support young folks, also incredibly important. So the homeless response system is supposed to respond and assist at every level, but it also means that we have to build these connections with other systems of care to truly have a seamless and relevant and responsive approach.
Yeah. I'm gonna add stuff for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Cool. So like, yes to all of this. And I think I just wanted to give like a slightly more concrete example.
Mm-hmm.
So when discharging somebody from juvenile justice, they should have a discharge address. You should confirm that this address is somewhere that they can be. Like it can be something simple like that, or like an easier one. As an adult, when you enter like like a walk-in clinic, one of the first things that you're asked is like, what's your home address? If you identify that you do not have a home address, they connect you to like social work to discuss that and what that means and assess if you're in shelter. But when you're a young person accessing help services by yourself, that connection point isn't the same. Addressing youth homelessness as a subpopulation, even from like a healthcare services, can really just mean having the resources on hand to tell a young person, hey, here's some places to go if you don't know where to go. Hey, here's some services that can assist you. Hey, here's a couple of like drop-in centers that work specifically with youth and young adults. Shelter rules and structures. Sometimes it means that even if you're part of a youth shelter, if the curfew is 7 p.m., but you're in school from 3 to 5 and then you work from 6 to 10, the option should not be find a new job or be discharged. Like it's the same way we want young people, older adults, the same way we want people experiencing homelessness to move through the system. We need to be able to work with people within the system to make it adapt to their needs. Everybody should have access to shelter and housing, but that also means that like everybody should be treated like a person and have like rights within these systems to protect them too. Nobody wants to choose between being able to feed themselves and being able to be inside. You should be able to do both. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would love for you to keep talking. Talking about being a person. This next slide is one that I think I'd love for you to speak to.
Vibes. Youth collaboration is my passion. Can you tell? So part of what youth collaboration means, it means that you let youth lead, you listen to youth, but like really listen. It means that you're not collecting answers from your young people. You're asking them for your opinions. You're working together as a team. You're trying to build a meaningful relationship. You're trying to collaborate together. Too often, people think that like interacting with young people is the same as collaborating with young people. It's not. So a survey can be an interaction. That's a one-time transactional moment in time where you have a need, it has been fulfilled by the young person that you need to sign off, but that's not a relationship. That's not collaborative. The young person 80% of the time does not know what that survey has attributed to or what it's going to come out to. There's no feedback loop. When you're making meaningful partnerships, that means that you're making equitable decisions. You're building trust and you're being human with each other. It's often said that like young people have a hard time or don't want to participate in spaces. That's not true. It means that the space in itself isn't accessible to that young person. It means that like when you're working together effectively, young people will work with you, but that also means that you need to be able to work with them. For example, active homelessness should not be a barrier to participation, but it does mean that there should be accommodations made for those who are actively experiencing homelessness, because what you want is the experience of people who are living their lives. And that means you need to be able to work with what life gives them and what it gives you. Older people must be willing to undergo the difficult work about examining biases about what young people can contribute. That means, again, it seems hard to do things when they're new. Doing new things is hard. But as people, we can adapt and we can change and we can grow. And that means that if you want to work together to serve and assist young people, you need to trust that they also know what is good for themselves. It means unpacking adultism. It means, despite the fact that everybody wants to care for this young person, not being paternalistic and expecting them to be like the master of their own lives. No, school might not be the most important thing to somebody who is actively trying to figure out where they're going to sleep tomorrow. That could be something we can worry about in 3 months. There's things that you're going to have to do, and it kind of just means letting people go at their own pace, letting people make their own tracks, and being able to let people make mistakes. Youth collaboration means that you are working together to build partnerships and relationships and be a part of a team with these youth and young adults. It means that nobody is the leader, but everybody is working together. And ensuring equitable compensation for youth and young adults. Pizza is not payment. Pizza is not payment. Pizza has never been payment. Nobody has ever showed up to an event and accepted pizza in trade for money. Pizza can be present. It is nice to give me pizza. It is nice to offer people that may or may not have access to stable food sources food. That's dope. That should not be in lieu of payment. When you're working with youth and young adults, when you're working with anybody who has experienced homelessness, but like especially youth and young adults, because like the level of fresh trauma is like a whole different. I'm sorry, I have a cough stuck in my mouth. It means that you're paying these young people. As adults, we are paid for our time, regardless of what we do. In these spaces, youth and young adults are putting in emotional labor, emotional footwork. They're often like sharing their stories, their levels of comfort, their levels of discomfort, their access and experiences within the system. I like to call youth and young adults that I work with internal systems experts, because they have the knowledge of your systems, the systems that adult partners tend to work for, our systems from the inside out, meaning that we have the concept of what's supposed to be happening, but they know what's happening when you're inside it. They know the pitfalls, the gaps, who's doing what, who isn't doing what, how it's supposed to go in practice. But they can tell you how it's going in practice, and you can tell them how it's going in theory. Pizza is not payment. In order to get equitable feedback, in order to work with somebody, in order to tell someone that you respect them, their time, and are thankful for their presence, you need to pay them the same way that you are paid to like be an adult partner. All of the work going into this is work, be it a youth and young adult or an adult partner. Everybody is working together and everybody is putting in work. And that means that everyone should be paid for their time. Because also it seems kind of backwards to say to a person experiencing homelessness, thank you for your time. I can offer you no monetary compensation. I'm pretty sure life is already hard. I'm pretty sure monetary compensation could go a little bit longer than the slice of pizza that we're about to devour. And with that, I will pass it to Kira.
Thanks, Ziggy. I want to name on this particular slide and on this topic that this is truly about authentic engagement, and this applies to all folks experiencing homelessness. So if you are building services for young folks, have young folks help lead the way, and not just here's what we developed, take a look, yes or no, and then go back and do whatever you're going to do, but really a true engagement and co-design, co-planning, co-collaboration throughout the process. And so the same is true for other populations when it comes to, if you're developing services for veterans, you want to talk to veterans that have the most proximity to the challenges that you're trying to resolve. So really think about that. But I think the added element here when we're talking about collaboration with young folks is that third bullet there, that there is difficult work that as older adult partners engaging with young folks need to do to really examine our own biases. There's resistance and negative experiences that young folks face when trying to help lead and step into these roles because of adultism and because of some of our assumptions that we carry intentionally or unintentionally. And so making sure to give special attention to that when specifically engaging with young folks around developing services for young folks.
Oh, I want to add one more thing on this. When you're collaborating with youth and adults, the same way we're prepared for conversations we're about to have, the same way we're given feedback and we're given prep time. We know all the acronyms. The same way we're given all that information beforehand. Make sure that when you're working with youth and young adults, that you're expecting them to come to the table prepared, but that you're giving them preparation. That when you're having youth and young adults enter your meeting space, that you're not expecting the young adults to be prepared to enter the room with the adults, but you're preparing everyone to be working together at a level playing field. It shouldn't be preparing the youth and young adults for the adult meeting. There should be preparing the adults to collaboratively work with young adults. And some of that means we're gonna drop our biases at the door. We're gonna check all the extra stuff later. Some of it means, hey, we're gonna start from functional zero. It might mean sending out acronym sheets beforehand, or it might just mean every time we say HUD instead of housing and urban development, that somebody's there dropping the acronyms in the chat. Making things equitable and accessible should be something that becomes commonplace, but it's something that's super important with youth collaboration because it's easy to feel like, especially in those situations, that you're the person in the room that doesn't know what's happening. But that doesn't have to be the way it is, and there's easy ways to combat that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ziggy. And you want to go to the next slide? So we just want to highlight, we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about why this is important, want to highlight a few promising practices. And these are just some specific practices that we see especially engaged or applied when it comes to youth homelessness. These are not specific only to young folks, and it's not the only solutions to support young people who are experiencing homelessness or risk of homelessness. But some of these highlights are really, you can see the kind of themes and commonality where we're highlighting the emphasis on youth choice, on person-centered services, and on supporting permanent connections, that piece that we mentioned earlier that's so critical of having positive, stable relationships with older adult partners to help support ongoing stability, to support the permanency of having somebody to go to when you're in crisis and knowing that that person is there for you. So these, we won't go into detail in all of this. I know we're starting to run out of time and want to make sure to have time for any questions that come up, but the couple pieces I would highlight, the direct cash transfers in particular, that is a very explicit approach that has been kind of emerging in the last few years. And Point Source Youth has a lot of good resources on this, so that's something I'm going to put in the chat here for you in case you're interested in learning more about that. Again, this is one of those interventions really focused on person-centered services, tailored approach. This is distributing cash to young folks in a way that works for each individual. So it is really recognizing that basic needs need to be met, and we don't have to create a whole lot of rules and regulations about what folks need to do to get just the basic services and basic needs that would help resolve their particular situation. A lot of family engagement focus here, host homes and kinship housing, helping young folks connect with stable housing and supports, either through, stranger matching per se, or self-identified hosts. So if there is a trusted adult partner in their circle, in their environment, that may be able to offer a host home, that's something that could be supported through host home programming. And throughout, that last piece here is really something to be built in across all programming for young folks, is positive youth development, trauma-informed care, really building in these principles in any service delivery targeted to support young people experiencing homelessness or risk of homelessness. And the next slide, and we'll just do one more and then we can kind of jump back. Just want to kind of highlight some of these federal opportunities for funding. And one thing we haven't said yet that I'll just toss in here too is that, we're talking about young people experiencing homelessness. You and your programs may serve general population. You may have services targeted to young folks right now. You may have services targeted to veterans or targeted to families. The important thing to remember always is that young folks may fit into multiple of these subpopulations. So they are families sometimes. They are veterans. They are young adults, and they may be accessing adult focused shelter. And so really taking these principles and practices about effectively serving young people into all programming is really critical. And there are some key federal opportunities that are out there that are specifically funding youth programming. Ziggy and I work a lot on YHDP, so we could talk about that for a long time. But do want to highlight that I think there's a total of we just had announcements this week. I think approximately $380 million now has gone into communities through YHDP, the Youth Homeless Demonstration Program, and that's across 94 communities. So 17 new communities were just announced this week, including Sacramento and Santa Barbara. So yay, California, adding to the California mix of YHDP communities. There is also runaway and homeless youth funding for specific services offered through the Family and Youth Services Bureau, foster youth initiative serving young folks who have left foster care at 16 or older, and then family unification vouchers supporting families in reconnecting in housing or supporting youth between 18 and 24 who left foster care or will be leaving foster care. So these are just some of the highlights of what funding is available to specifically support young folks, and you may already be working with these sources. Ziggy, did you want to add pieces to kind of either the last slide or this one, just kind of what is out there and what to look into when it comes to services that can be provided and tailored to young folks?
No, I think this is a pretty solid spread.
Mhm.
If I think of anything, I'll drop it in the chat.
So there, the next slide, I think we do have just a little bit of some links and resources to share with you. There is a resources page here. So just wanted to make sure you have access to some of these data sources that we shared and the landing page for YHDP if you want to learn more about that or apply for a future round if you haven't received before. So wanted to leave you with resources, but also want to leave a couple of minutes here. I think we have time. If you have any questions, does anyone have anything you want to add about your experience in youth homelessness or questions you have for Ziggy or I?
Can we drop the resources in the chat? Because I don't think we have that slide in the slideshow.
I will do it. Yes.
It looks like it's actually hidden, but I'll make sure to unhide it so that
Oh,
they
that
can
was,
access
yeah,
it when it's sent out.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really awesome stuff in there. Just want to say, like, especially building on the like youth collaboration work that Ziggy talked about. True Colors United is one of our partners working in a lot of areas, but also deeply in YHDP. They have a youth collaboration toolkit. There's some resources there to kind of dig more into compensation for young folks and how to make sure that you've got adequate compensation for the young folks leading your work. Lots of good things in there.
Well, no one has asked this, but as you all were presenting, I thought about the safety net that you mentioned. Is there or any ways or any recommendations that you can give to communities that may not already have a safety net on, on creating that for their community?
I mean, I think it's a variety of things, is what I would say. I think, the safety net for young folks doesn't look the same from one person to the next. So I think it's really about when you are in a position that engages with young folks experiencing homelessness, really building on that trauma-informed care, building relationship with that young person to know what kinds of supports may be most needed in their particular life, in their particular circumstances, and making it a part of your work to help build those connections. Particularly for young folks experiencing homelessness, so often the older adult partners, the supports in their life are paid to be in their life. And what we want to do is really build like case managers, right? Outreach workers, that's what I mean. What we want to do is help create those connections so that there are more than just folks paid to be in their lives that can support them into the future and build those stronger connections in the community.
I think to go off some of that is like, yes. And also like a large part of this is making things accessible to an invisible population. So if you don't know where people are, you don't know how to access them. So example, when we're advertising like drop-in services, things like that, I think I used to post flyers like in the library, but I would also post flyers in my school. Like example, young adults in schools don't realize that like their McKinney-Vento liaison to make sure that they can get to school even if they're experiencing homelessness is probably the guidance counselor. Because when you're in high school, you generally don't want to talk to the guidance counselor. You don't want to be referred to guidance counselor. You're going the opposite direction. So like I think the key to making these safety nets is making things accessible without looking. I think a large part of the reason like that I got through services was because my friends knew where things were and were like, yeah, I'll go with you. So like then it was like, oh, we can post flyers in the library. But like also we did outreach to like schools, and there were just like little pull tabs that had like, hey, if you or somebody else needs like a link, like resources, take this little thing, and it would like connect you to like a chat with one of us or something like that. So I think a large part of it is like making things accessible to everyone. So like I don't think services should only be accessible to youth experiencing homelessness. There should just be service accessible in places that youth frequent, so that if they're experiencing homelessness, they have the freedom to know where they're going as opposed to trying to find an open door. Like, yeah. I think that the first step I would take is just making connections, making sure that like people know that you're there, community organizations know that you're there.
I like that a lot. Definitely stuff that you wouldn't just necessarily think about. Do we have anyone else that have any questions? Want to unmute yourself and ask your questions? I know we don't have any in the chat at this time. I do think that the information you all provided was definitely needed. And in our communities, we may see a lot more, a lot more of the families that, are homeless. So therefore those youth individuals are really taken care of. So we don't necessarily have to step in as much as, we would if that youth was just an individual alone. But since we don't have any more questions, thank you, Kyra and Ziggy, for your awesomeness today. You've really given us some information that I think that we all can use as a foundation in the communities that we serve. Thank you to everyone else that has played a big part in making today successful as well. And thank you all for showing up. Please remember that a survey will pop up once you exit this session. And please do take a quick minute to answer so that we can get some feedback. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good day.